Hello, my name's Neil Gardner, this is Totoro, and what's this all about? Welcome to where I am, this exciting room, and Totoro and I are here to talk to you about our love of Studio Ghibli films, or Ghibli films if I'm going to be accurate to the original name of the Saharan wind, after which the famous Japanese studio is named. But Totoro is of course, the icon, the mascot of Studio. I'm going to say Ghibli because I always have. I know it should be Ghibli. But he's the mascot from a very, very exciting, brilliant kids movie. It's great for adults too, called My Neighbor Totoro, and we'll be talking about that in a moment. But isn't he lovely? He's all fluffy and cute and gorgeous. He's the large one of the Totoros. I did have some smaller ones here somewhere, but they've all fallen on the floor. Amazing prep work for this video. But yeah, so I'm Neil Gardner. I am an audio book and radio producer, director, writer, and I've had a great life and still have a great life creating content for people to listen to. But one of my most favourite things in the world, one of the things that's inspired me over many, many years has been the work of Studio Ghibli and their amazing films and shorts, particularly inspired by I suppose the originator, the main man there, Hayao Miyazaki, or Miyazaki-san if you prefer, as well as the rest of the team there. But he's kind of the Walt Disney of the company there. I hate it when people call him the Walt Disney of the East, because that's I don't think the comparison is quite fair. They're very different art forms, even if they're animated films, but they're very different things. Japanese animation, as we know, is not the same as Western animation. It does very different things, tells stories in very different ways, takes risks that Western animation rarely ever takes, and has styles and motifs and ways of doing things. I think is why we all fall in love with it so much. And we're not just talking about anime here, the kind of episodic thing, but particularly with the Japanese animated movies, and not just the ones by Ghibli, but the whole area of full-length, long-form animated movies coming out of Japan. They do some very serious stuff, very adult stuff, some groundbreaking stuff, some amazing futuristic stuff, but also an awful lot of very close, personal, intimate things, which in the West would probably only ever be done in live action. But in Japan, they will use animation for a lot of that, because animation isn't just seen as something for children. And I think the works of the Ghibli team over their many, many years prove that, because we have films which are very clearly for young people, but great for adults too, of course. There are ones that are much more serious, much more thoughtful, ones that are clearly aimed at an adult audience, and then you've got other ones which kind of straddle all ages. They've got a bit of whimsy, a bit of wonder, but throughout all of them there's this incredible animation, this mostly hand-drawn, crafted animation and storytelling, which again in the West you would probably only see screenplays like that with live action, but in Japan and in the East you do seem to get it an awful lot more in animated movies. So let's have a think about some of the movies. You may not know all of them, there have been so many of them, but some of my favourites, actually going all the way back to the very first one, which is Nausicaa, which is just an incredible environmental awareness movie, and it was a movie based off of Miyazaki-san's own existing manga. And if you ever get a chance to pick a copy of that up, there's a beautiful hardback edition. I think Viz did it. Wow, it's just incredible, and the translation from page to screen is pretty close. It's off the bat, you see everything that seems to fascinate both Miyazaki and the rest of the team. We have flying, we have young women coming into power and independence. We have slightly altered worlds, but they still reflect our own. Possibly they're the future, or they're a fantastical version, or they're an alternate universe version, but they could well be ours. We have environmental issues, we have a love of nature and a belief that humanity should work with nature rather than against nature. And these are themes and motifs that will come up again and again. But throughout all of that, this very first movie, even though it was made so many years ago, still stands up in its awesome artwork. The brilliance of the pacing, the music, everything about it is something it's well worth watching. It can be a little dark at times, so may not be perfect for the younger kids, but it's certainly something for slightly older kids and for all adults out there. It's a really good one for talking about not just the art of movie making, but also storytelling and some of the important stories and issues that come up throughout it. So that's Nausicaa, a really, really good film, well worth you checking out. And then a couple of years later, they did a very interesting thing in Japan anyway. They brought out two films together, kind of like a double A-side record. And one of them was My Neighbor Totoro, widely regarded by anyone who's seen it as one of the best films of all time. It's whimsical, it's wonderful. It tells a story of two young girls who move into the countryside with their father whilst their mother is ill and convalescing in hospital, and they meet these incredible creatures, these Totoros, and the Totoros represent the nature of the countryside but help the girls on their journey of understanding and growth. And it's really exciting and very magical. It works for everyone of all ages. It's not just a kids' movie. The characters, the creatures are just fantastic, but the artwork has just jumped yet again from Nausicaa. Much richer palette. The depictions of the countryside and the whimsical creatures that they meet are all just, they'll stick with you for the rest of your life. It's something that I love so much about Ghibli movies, is the way the creatures and the characters just stand out and almost automatically just become these lifelong obsessions for fans like me, because the design of them is just so special, so amazing. But at the same time, if you were in Japan, you'd gone to see that film, you would have also been offered the chance to see another film called Grave of the Fireflies. Now, Grave of the Fireflies, you might have heard of this. This is not another typical Ghibli fantastical film. It's probably one of the saddest, most moving, most heartfelt movies you'll ever see, yet it's animated. The only thing ever came close to it for impact on me from the West was something like Watership Down, maybe. This is a story about a young brother and sister who are left homeless after the firebombing of their town during the war, and it's their story of their survival and how their family fails them and how society fails them and how they look out for each other. And to tell you much more than that will ruin it, but it's worth every minute seeing it. Be prepared to cry, be prepared to be moved, be prepared to be shocked by what you would have thought an animated movie would be and then what it comes out as. This is filmmaking at its highest art, and it doesn't matter that it's animated. The animation, I think, makes it even more important, stronger, more heartfelt than probably if it was done live action. And the interesting is that these two films went together in the Japanese cinema. They were a double act. So you had the whimsicality of this little guy, and well, big guy and his friends and the girls, and then you had this incredible heart-wrenching story of these two young children in a war scenario. I don't know anyone else who would ever even dare do that. Yet that's Ghibli. They were there. They were doing it. After that, they continued with quite a bevy of light-hearted, whimsical films. One of my all-time favourites from them is Kiki's Delivery Service, about a young witch, 13-year-old witch who has to spend her first year away from home learning her craft. But it's not really about witchcraft. It's what you do with your abilities. Again, it's a coming-of-age story. It's Miyazaki looking at life through the lens of a young girl as she grows up, something he's very, very good at. And also flying is involved because she decides to use her ability to fly on her broomstick to create a courier service. Very modern, you might think. It's a genuinely wonderful story, lots of great character to it, amazing use again of flying as a motif, and character development. There's a beautiful little black cat. I think I've got a little black cat here. I've got a little black cat here, and he's called Gigi. In fact, one of my cats is called Gigi after this little fellow, and in the UK dub, he's got a fantastic voiceover. Really, really good fun. So yeah, great characters again. There we go, we have both of them. Let's see how many I can hold as this video goes on. And great for all the family, really good. At around about the same time, probably their most famous film up to that point was released in the West, and had these little guys in it. Do you know this little guy? It's like a little forest chap. Kind of head goes... This is from Princess Mononoke. Again, quite an adult film for older children and for adults. Story of industrialization versus nature. Again, I don't want to go too deep into storylines if you haven't seen it. It's a very moving, very exciting, quite heavy film, which is great for thinking about how humanity has grown. And with a lot of these films, a lot of it is harking back to how Japan grew post-World War II, particularly the bigger cities like Tokyo, and how they took over the countryside and kind of destroyed a part of Japanese heritage and history, particularly in, say, some of the later films. There's a film called Pompoko, which I absolutely adore, which really does touch on how the growth of Tokyo into the Tamahara Hills affected the wildlife and the local spirits and religious beliefs, and how humanity and, I suppose, the older way of life learned to coexist. And it's quite tragic but beautiful and hilarious, and got some very naughty raccoons in it who can morph and change shape. But Princess Mononoke really was a big breakout hit for Ghibli in the West, with an amazing UK reversion, or say Western reversion, Americanized version, I suppose you could call it, with an amazing voiceover cast. And that's one of the interesting things with Ghibli films. I found that I love them all in the native original Japanese. It just sounds so good. But particularly because I think so many of the Ghibli films have been localized for the West through Disney and Buena Vista, and even some of the Pixar people who have been involved, and some amazing people like Neil Gaiman have been involved, that they've never just done a quick dub. They've always tried to make them make sense to a Western audience. So unless there's a section where it really has to delve deep into Japanese culture, they will try to make it understandable for us. And that's what Princess Mononoke did so well. It introduced Japanese and Eastern themes, but in a way that I think Westerners could really understand and not feel ostracized from. So there's some really interesting work in Princess Mononoke. Very, very interesting. Let's see if we can get Gigi back here. I've got all three now. Look, I'm being crowded out. So we had a whole load of really interesting films around that time. There's a very famous film by them called Porco Rosso, which follows the exploits of a pilot, kind of post-World War One, around the Mediterranean, who for some reason has been turned into a pig, an anthropomorphic pig. It's never really talked about why. Very much an adult film in terms of the themes, but still very entertaining for younger children. Absolute love of biplanes and flying boats and general flying in that film. Again, really, really interesting, makes you think an awful lot. And then I say there's Pompoko about the raccoons and the expansion of Tokyo, and what the animals have to do to try to save their home, I suppose, is the best way of looking at it, or integrate with humanity. And then these guys, they all go off to one side. I'll put them there to sort of balance up the screen. We get to probably the most famous of Ghibli's films in the West. It won an Oscar, of course, and it's called Spirited Away, and it's actually the film that first got me into them. Up to then, I knew the characters just from seeing them on the shelves of HMV, but never actually picked one up. And a friend of mine said, well, you must watch Spirited Away, and that's it. It became my all-time favourite film, alongside, of course, Star Wars and Labyrinth. What a film. What an amazing original version. What a really incredible westernized version it is. The voice cast on both versions is amazing. It's a film that if you haven't seen, you must see. It's great for kids, it's great for adults. It has this amazing blend of traditional hand-drawn animation, but with an incredible use of CG technology, just to expand the world and to do some things that would be probably impossible or extremely expensive to do with hand-drawn. The storyline, again, follows a young girl finding herself and learning her place in the world, but does so in some truly unique ways. I think it's a film that I don't think I've known anyone to see it who hasn't enjoyed it, and that really exploded them onto the Western scene. And from then on forwards, all of their movies were very quickly, the back catalogue was then re-released on DVD, and then later on Blu-ray, and then of course all future films with a partnership with Studio Canal in Europe came out pretty fast after their Japanese debuts. And they just kept going from strength to strength. The next massive film you'll probably have heard of is Howl's Moving Castle, a very, very interesting adaptation of the original novel. There's also an adaptation of Tales from Earthsea, which was less successful for them, but an interesting experiment in what you can do with working with source material. And it'd be nice to see maybe someone come back and have another go with that and see what else could be done. And then moving forward, they did a few other interesting adaptations. Arrietty, which is kind of based on The Borrowers, was a beautiful piece. And interestingly, and I haven't talked about the music so much up to this point, but so much of the music up to this point in their movies was done by a single composer called Joe Hisaishi, and you'll know his work if you've ever seen any of the films. He's so beautiful with the piano and then these incredible soaring compositions, but particularly around piano pieces. But then Arrietty came along, and the music was done by this incredible French harpist, who, if I remember right, her surname is Corbel, who had been a fan of Miyazaki's work and had sent him one of her albums, and he was so impressed, he invited her to do music for one of his films, and it came out with Arrietty, and it was sad not to have Joe's piano work in there, but this score is something very special. So we had Arrietty, and then there's a few other films in there, and this is where it started changing up a little bit, and you can see where the different members of the team were going in different directions. So there is another one of their more whimsical films called Ponyo, which is about a little sea princess, I suppose, or sea girl, sea creature, who longs to be living on the land with a young boy. So she makes it happen, but this has terrible side effects with the rest of the sea, and her father gets very upset, and it leads this epic kind of confrontation between the Lord of the Sea and the people on the land. It's absolutely gorgeous, lots of fun. But then also Miyazaki had always wanted to tell the absolute story of flying from a Japanese perspective, and his father had been a plane developer and builder during his day, and Miyazaki wanted to tell the story of the development of a plane which is infamous for all of us who know anything about World War II, and is an interesting topic for someone, and also quite a contentious topic, but about the Japanese Zero fighter plane. And so he makes this film called The Wind Rises, a very personal tale about the man who developed and built and designed the Zero, but who hadn't done it within the storyline for war purposes, but for a love of aviation. And if you're really into planes and animated planes and aviation history, this is one for you. It's a very adult storyline. It needs to be thought about historically and where it sits within the difference of opinion, I suppose, or difference of interpretation of pre-World War II Japanese history, but it's well worth a look because it speaks so much about Miyazaki-san's heart and what he's so desperately wanted to tell as a story. And then we get towards the end, because unfortunately around this time, Ghibli was starting to wrap things up. The age of the animators, the industry itself, the success of the movies were all kind of piling on one another, and so we get into a kind of a last few films, and they sadly don't make movies at the moment. They do still co-produce, and they're still involved in stuff, but there's a few small interesting movies. There's Princess Kaguya, which is a very interesting hand-drawn film, well worth seeing, very unusual, almost like a flick book effect. Then there's a film called Marnie, which is extremely heartfelt, about a young teenage girl and a friendship that lasts through death. And that kind of wraps up their story. I know I've missed many out because I don't want this to be like an endless video. But across their range, there's been whimsical, kid-friendly, fantastical films like The Cat Returns, which is just one of my absolute favourites. Kiki's Delivery Service, of course, The Totoros, Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle. They all have incredible stories and meanings to them, but they're very light and beautifully animated and just bright and such a joy to watch. Then there's been the darker, more serious films, the more adult films, such as Grave of the Fireflies, and an incredible film called Only Yesterday about being an adult and going back to your past and deciding whether or not you want to work in the big city or maybe have a more country-like existence. And many other films, Wind Rises, for example. And then there's everything kind of in between. It really runs the gamut of storytelling, and I don't think there's been anyone like it anywhere else in the world that can match the storytelling, the characterization, the visualization, the animation, the blend of original 2D hand-drafted, beautiful artwork with the more modern CG elements being slowly brought in as the years have gone by. on top of that, of course, they've done so much else. They were involved a little bit with Neon Genesis Evangelion. I mean, who'd have thought that? Also, one of my all-time favourite things, Lupin the Third, the Castle Cagliostro, which, if you've never seen it, is just an absolute masterpiece of filmmaking, action, adventure. It's got one of the best car chases of all time, and it's animated. And also, there's a small little thing called Panda Go Panda, which it's almost like a precursor to My Neighbor Totoro, but again, it's just so Ghibli, it's so Miyazaki. Everything they have done, I won't say everything is perfect, but everything they've done, you could happily watch all of their movies, all of their shorts, their TV stuff, and you'll go away, apart from a couple of them, with a big old smile on your face, and that's why I love them so much. The other couple, they're just going to make you cry. They're informative, they're magical, they're speculative. They're something we just don't get out of Western cinema very often. And what's been so amazing is, throughout their years, the people who have worked as animators and filmmakers and directors and producers have gone on to do their own things. And if I can, I'd like to end this video with a recommendation for a new movie, which just came out on Blu-ray at the moment. And people are calling it Ghibli-esque. I'm not sure if it is necessarily, but it's certainly... it certainly wouldn't be here without what Ghibli have done. And it's called Oko's Inn, or Oko's Inn if you prefer, O-K-K-O, Oko's Inn. Brilliant, beautiful, heartwarming story of a young orphan girl going to work in her grandmother's inn, very traditionally Japanese. It really, if you're missing your Ghiblis, go and check it out. Yes, we'll never have anything quite as wonderful as Miyazaki-san and his work, and the work of his partners and his friends and his colleagues and his producers and writers, and we need more films with Joe Hisashi's music in it, and we just need more Ghibli in our lives. But there are spiritual successors out there doing great films, so I hope you'll go and check out a few films by these guys and go see some Neighbor Totoro, because he's a cute old thing and he does like his belly being rubbed. So I hope that's inspired you, and I hope you agree with me that, if nothing else, what a wonderful world we have with Studio Ghibli movies in it. And they're all out now on Blu-ray. You can get box sets, you can get steelbooks, you can just get in every variant you ever want. So there's no excuse. Go check them out. And well, that's been me, Neil Gardner, and these fluffy dudes here. Look, there's a Gigi there, and we'll say bye-bye. Bye!